Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if it's afternoon or morning. I came from Brazil I left Brazil on Friday morning, and it was not a non-stop flight, but I was flying for a considerable period of time, and I arrived in Darwin at midnight on Saturday. So with all the change in the hours, I think I was travelling for over 30 hours. But it's great to be back in Darwin. As Don said, I started my association with the Australian meat industry in Darwin. A young POMI trainee came out in 1984. Had a very, pink flesh. Did this Darwin heat. I started actually in September, the build-up to the monsoon, and it really was a great time here. And I've still got a number of friends here who I spent some time with the last couple of days. But it's really good to be in Darwin. It's really good to see the industry in such good shape. It's a real credit to the industry what we've done. I say we because I'm in that industry. What you've done here in Australia on animal welfare in the live business. I was on the MLA board when I think it's 2011 when the Ludwig stopped the boats, and it was a really tough time. And I really think you've really pulled yourselves out of that. And I've been really impressed this morning seeing all the controls that you've got in on animal welfare, all the controls in the monitoring of supply chains. Bloody well done, Australia. You've done a bloody good job. Give yourselves a round of applause. That's a pretty weak round of applause. I clapped louder than you, but anyway. But no, you've done really well. Look, I'll go on with my presentation now. But the first thing, if I press this button here. This is just a short video of who is Minerva. So if you could play the video, please.
The world needs food. This is a challenge that cannot be put off. Every moment, everywhere, in hundreds of countries, and in several cultures, we need high-quality food. However, producing quality food is only one part of this work. Our mission includes ensuring the integrity of that quality as it finds its way to millions of tables. That's what makes us Minerva Foods. Over 14,000 people impassioned by the satisfaction of feeding the world. Minerva Foods, with 17 production sites near the principal livestock sources of Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Colombia, and the main ports of export in South America. Our 13 distribution centers in Brazil and Paraguay guarantee a wide range of animal proteins for our target markets. Minerva Foods continues to grow with each passing day in our effort to supply for an ever-increasing demand. Our service platform is present in over 100 countries in various parts of the world, serving all of our clients face-to-face. Minerva Foods has strengthened our South America presence with the acquisition of plants in Uruguay, Brazil, Paraguay, and Colombia, recognized for their efficiency and convenient locations near sources of natural resources and qualified labor force. We are a world benchmark in production efficiency, the best company in the sector, according to the Exame and Globo Rural magazines, always producing with sustainability and respect to the environment. Minerva Foods undergoes constant improvement with new ideas, new markets, and the same determination. We won't stop. Why? Simply because this is the challenge we strive to meet. After all, we are Minerva Foods, and our inspiration is to be always at the forefront. Minerva Foods, always ahead.
Okay, so my presentation today, you've already heard a little bit about Minerva. I'll give you a little bit more introduction who we are. I'd like to go into introduction of the Brazilian beef industry, really concentrating on the huge increases in productivity we've seen in the farm sector. a view of the international beef market and Brazil's competitive position. We've also got operations in Paraguay and Uruguay and just recently Colombia, so I'll give you a brief outline of that as well. Explain a little bit about our live business. We're the largest live shipper out of Brazil. And then give a view of the future, and really is a view from South America, from Brazil, and I've done a bit of a SWOT analysis on how we see Australia and where we see Brazil going forward. Okay, it's just a picture of one of our plants. It's on a greenfield site. We built that factory, would be 5 years ago now, up in Rondônia. It's quite a big site. It got capacity to process about 1,500 cattle a day. Okay, who is Minerva? Minerva started out in 1965. It's founded by a family, the Queiroz family. They were farmers in the state of Sao Paulo and also in Minas Gerais. They were large cattle transporters as well. The system in Brazil, very different here than Australia. The processor pays for the transport of the cattle to the processing plants. They were a very big transporter, and in 1966 they got a big contract with the Vesti Group. Vesti Group's who I used to work for. They are very big in Brazil, and they had a plant in Barretos, and this is the same place where the Queiroz family were based. And they got a big contract with them. They started moving cattle to the Vesti Group, and Vestis were expanding quite rapidly in Brazil at that period of time. In 1992, one of the big Vesti plants was up for sale. Unfortunately, they didn't buy it, but they bought another plant, the Minerva plant, which was a redundant plant, not redundant, but it was a bankrupted plant, an old plant, and they started to reform that. The 5 brothers all got together, and the capital they put into the business was their cattle. So they put their cattle in to fund the business going forward. And the 5 brothers are still very much involved today. They're part of our Conselho, which is in English the board, the main board of the company. The second generation are now running the business. Fernando Queiroz, he's the president, the CEO of the business. He and I work very close together. And Frederico Queiroz, he's the CEO of our live business. He was going to come here to the conference to be here with me, but unfortunately, just with work commitments, he couldn't make it. The Minerva growth has been quite spectacular. Their focus has been very different than the other big players in Brazil. Up to 2005, they had basically 3 plants. Those 2 red dots there are the states of Sao Paulo and also of Goiás. They were accessing about 16% of the available cattle at the time. 2007, they expanded more, purchased 2 more plants to make 5 plants in total. One in Mato Grosso do Sul, in Batayporã, and the other one up in Tocantins, in Araguaína. In 2010, more expansion up to 8 plants, and the first purchase outside of Brazil in Paraguay, in Asunción, Frigomerc, and captured really nearly 40% of the cattle, accessed about 40% of the cattle population in Brazil. This is a map of today. As I say, the strategy of Minerva has been very different than JBS and Marfrig, the other 2 big players. JBS, who I used to work for, expanded out into America, here into Australia, and other parts of the world. Minerva have seen South America as the future of the beef business, and they haven't got into other proteins. They're purely a beef operation. So expanding further into Brazil, into further states in Rondônia, Mato Grosso, up to 11 plants in total in Brazil, and then buying 2 more plants in Paraguay. So there are 3 plants now in Paraguay, all in Asunción. Buying 2 plants in Uruguay, one in the north of Uruguay and one in the south of Uruguay, 2 very good plants. Very different types of cattle there. European breeds, Herefords, very advanced, much more advanced system than in Paraguay and Brazil. And just recently, we've expanded into Colombia. Colombia, I don't know if some of you have been, a great source of cattle. Nearly 24 million head of cattle in Colombia. An industry which is really there for a pioneering spirit to develop. Very, very good cattle. We have been exporting live cattle out of Colombia to Venezuela, and this year we purchased our first plant, and we will look to be purchasing further plants in the future. So really, Minerva's view of the world is the future, and my presentation will show some figures which saying we see the growth in South America, in these countries, and possibly in Argentina. Now there's been a change in government, makes it much more friendly towards the business environment, as a real powerhouse going forward. If I talk about the Brazilian beef industry, into some very big numbers, just headline numbers, but I'll go into greater detail. This just gives you a bit of a flavour. The cattle population of over 200 million. The last figure, I think, is 224 million head. Only 20% of production is exported. Only 20%. That shows the potential of what can be exported going forward. I mean, there's over 200 million people in Brazil, so there's lots of mouths to feed. Three major players account for 80% of those exports. That's JBS, Minerva, and Marfrig. Rough figures, JBS just over 40% of exports, Minerva has a 20, and Marfrig has about 20. A kill figure today, a weekly kill figure of 700,000 head. Huge numbers, 35 million head a year in a kill. The structure of the industry is very different. That if you look at how many plants each of us have got, JBS has got over 40 plants, we've got 11, we've got 8 working, Marfrig's got about 12. Putting us all together, we would have less than 25% of the total kill in Brazil. So a lot less concentration, a lot more plants in Brazil. Of that 700,000 kill, 500,000 of that kill a week is really in plants which I would say in our terminology, you've got HACCP controls, and really a lot of them are export qualified plants. So you've got 200,000 killed in municipal abattoirs which don't have the same sort of standards of HACCP and controls going through their operation. I put down the cattle cost today. Sao Paulo we call is the base, and Brazil has a different way of pricing the cattle. It's 147 Brazilian reais per arroba. Arroba is 15 kilos, so divide by 15 and you get that, and divide by 3.8 you get a US dollar, divide by 0.72 you get Australian dollar, and that's the figure you come out to. That's our current cattle price today. It's come down recently, but it's fairly stable at the moment. I put Pará there because Pará is where we export our live cattle from. Sao Paulo is really from our meatworks. This is an interesting slide just showing the biomass production potential. It produced, I think, from the FAO, showing the amount of land still that can be developed in those countries. I'm not talking about knocking rainforest down or anything like that. This is huge potential of land which is underutilized within Brazil. You've got 187 million hectares in Brazil still of production that is available, which can be developed. So Brazil has a huge potential to grow further. Where are all the cattle in Brazil? The cattle in Brazil, I'll use this pointer, I'll use this map over here. The cattle in the past were down in the southeast part of Brazil. The cattle have actually moved northwest into this area here. This is the Amazon area up here. But this area here is where a lot of the cattle are today. Some of those states, the Mato Grosso state has 40 million head of cattle. Here the cattle have moved out because the push on land mass, on the land utilization, a lot of sugar cane. Previously it was coffee, before that, or after that was orange juice. Now it's a lot of sugar cane in this area, a lot of soya, but lots of area here being developed. So the cattle population has actually moved northwest. And that's where the expansion of Minerva in the plants that we've purchased and developed are in this area here. One big thing which has caught the industry a little bit by surprise, and that's a processing industry and not so much the farming sector because they knew what they were doing, has been the change in production systems on farm. what that's meant to us is in processing or in cattle raising, we've seen our average weights, and I looked at it the other day in our operation. Our average weights of kill in our production factories have increased 7 kilos in 1 year. Huge increase. Basically, there's been a big move where the cattle were left just on pasture, just on grass, and you see will be very similar possibly to here. The amount of gain per day in the dry, about 300 grams, or in the wet you could talk about nearly 800 grams per day. Then the farmers have introduced a semi-feedlot process, and the picture on the left-hand side is of a semi-feedlot, and that's cattle are grazed, and then they're moved to a feedlot, and they're given, on average, 4 kilos of feed, and you're getting a weight gain of 1 to 1.2 kilos. But where the real growth has come is the picture on the right-hand side, we call feedlot in pasture. And it's a pity I haven't brought another photograph, because there is a very good photograph showing a whole field full of these drums with this feed in there. And the cattle there are in the pasture with that supplement, taking on between 5 and 10 kilos each per day, and they're getting a gain of 1.2 to 1.4 kilos. So there's been quite a big change. And then we've got obviously the feedlots. There's no growth promoters in Brazil, none at all. In the feedlots today, most of the cattle are entire males using the natural testosterone, natural growth. They about 8 to 10 kilos, and they're getting 1.5 to 1.8. But this has caused a huge change in the business within Brazil. And I say the average weights have increased in cattle. And one thing that has changed a lot within the Brazilian farming system, the farmers today, where we're really chasing after the extra reais, or let's put it in the dollar terms, per kilo on the price they're getting for their cattle. They're really looking and say, okay, I've got 1,000 hectares, 10,000 hectares. What's the maximum I can achieve per hectare from that piece of land? And obviously that comes into the cattle and the extra weight. So there's been a big change in the industry, and it's a very positive change throughout the whole of the livestock industry in Brazil. Oh. It's very sensitive, this. Okay. The other system which has changed is a production system is actually mixing livestock with agriculture and with forestry. And what does that give? That integration give to the farmer and give to productivity? Better soil conservation, better soil recovery, less fertilizers used. Yield improvements on agriculture. Here on the left-hand side, you've got your pasture with maize grown on it, the middle one with pasture and forestry, and the third one with all types of agriculture. We estimate there's over 3 million hectares of land under these three systems. There's more cost-effective use of the land, increased land usage, and a better financial return. And that idea of actually getting more from the land that you've got, rather than just chasing a cattle price or whatever. And that's been a big change within the industry, and will continue to grow as the farmers see the benefits of using this integration of livestock, agriculture, and forestry. And as you get older, you need your glasses to read this, so just 1 second, I'll read it. Here I've got 3 graphs. I think if we look down on the bottom left-hand one, we've got the cattle population. The breeder cattle herd is, we say, an estimate for 2016 is 224 million head. If you look at a breeding margin at the female slaughter, the female slaughter is roughly average just over 40%. It's been ups and downs, lots of volatility there. But the figure which really is, and this is from our business intelligence unit, the breeding margin of cow-calf this year is around about 1.5%. That's 1.5% per month. Has been up to 2% a month. There's been huge profitability in the industry, huge profitability in that industry, and that you see just with the amount of cattle, the growth in the cattle, the growth in the numbers, the growth in the productivity. And you look at cow-calf production, this year, or 2014, we estimate there was 55 million calves. So huge numbers. There's been a record calf production despite an increase in female slaughter. I say we've seen an increase in 7 kilos in weights. There's been more use of artificial insemination for calf production, and that will continue. And if you just look at the returns that the farmer is getting, you can understand why you're seeing this growth in herd, why you're seeing this growth in investment in the industry, and the growth in productivity in the Brazilian industry. This is quite a good slide to show on productivity. And I see that just on cattle numbers, our good friend Len Steiner, it was on Beef Point, John Condon's daily email he sends around. I still get a copy of it. There was actually a report in, I think it was yesterday's, and saying that in Brazil in 2016, they think the herd, he thinks the herd will increase 6 million, up 2.8%, and 2017 another 6 million, 5.8. So you've got by the end of 2017, we'll have a herd of over 230 million. If you look at the top graph, Brazil versus the world, and the cattle herd, and here we measure between 1997 and 2015. The number of cattle slaughtered, the number of cattle slaughtered has increased in Brazil roughly 30%. If you look at the rest of the world, it's only increased 1%. I've already talked about the increase in the cattle herd. We've seen a 51% increase in the cattle herd in 1997 to 2015. The rest of the world has seen a 6% decrease. Talk about productivity. How many thousand tons? Million tons produced. Brazil has gone from 6.1 to 9.4 million, up 55%, and the world's only increased 13%. Big figure on exports. 1997, 200,000 tons from Brazil. 2015, 1.6 million, up 700%. These are huge, huge figures, driven really by what I've already talked about, increases in productivity and increasing in returns people are getting. If you look at some of on the productivity, Brazil still lags behind. Birth rates, it's been an increase of 5.3%, but we're still only 55%. The rest of the world is 65. I'm not sure what Australia is, but Brazil's still got a long way to go. But it's still producing 55 million calves. You imagine when they start get up to 64, 65. Just do the math. It's another 65 million calves. The slaughter rate in Brazil, and this is quite interesting because you look at how much being produced, and this actually, when you talk about the weight, the actual carcass weights, the slaughter rate has actually declined in Brazil. Has declined in the rest of the world as well. But the carcass weights, you see the carcass weights there in the 1997 to 2015 has increased 35%. And I'll put it to you that figure will grow considerably, given all those changes in feeding, which I've already mentioned to you, and the productivity gains within the industry. I think I'm considering there's strong productivity increase, but there's a huge potential to grow more. There's agriculture expansion, gives us more opportunities, and these technologies are coming in on the feedlot, semi-feedlot, feedlot in pasture, artificial insemination is really going to make a big difference and really push the production from Brazil. So Brazil is in a prime position on supply to expand even further. What I'd like to talk a little bit now, I've talked about Brazil, I'd like to talk about the international beef market as we see it. I think this one. This one. The first slide, I think everybody's seen the really headline figures, and sorry for the big macro figures, but I think it's quite important to have a look at. If you see that it'd be like, by the year 2050, world population will be 9.6 billion, food production needs to grow 70%. Where do we think this food production will come from? Here's an interesting map called the Map of Hunger, produced by the FAO. The OECD, sorry. And there you see where they think, and where we think also, who will increase their food production worldwide. See, Australia's going to be, they're putting down 17%, but I think we need a bit of rain in Australia to achieve those sort of figures. But in Brazil, we're talking over 40%, or 40% will come from Brazil. So we see the future of increased production is definitely going to come from South America. Here's just some big graphs just showing world beef production. These figures are 2014 of 60 million tonnes. You've got the figure I already mentioned of Brazil with 9 million, Australia 2.5. But it's really actually much more important not just look at the macro, the big figure. Let's have a look at the trends that we see in beef production worldwide. And here's a nice map of the world. Let's see if this actually works well. Good. Okay, two come out straight away. So the first two we've got is Mexico and United States. United States, as we all know, we've seen the herd contract quite substantially. They're a part of herd rebuilding. They're building a little. It's really stabilised now. Mexico's really fallen out of bed. They've really decreased quite substantially. Next country, Canada. Canada likewise, big reduction in the early 2000s. Stabilised a little bit, but it's still down, 2.2% down. If you look at the EU, Europe, there's been a slight increase. Very sporadic, very different. Yeah, I think you have to look very carefully where in Europe where that's increasing. And mostly, I think you'll probably find in parts of the old of Eastern Europe, old communist bloc, which is now part of the EU. If you look at Russia, and these figures quite surprised me, looking at what the production they had in 2000 and to 2004, very high, but they've really reduced quite substantially year on year, 2.9. Russian government, as some of you I know have visited Russia, you've seen the Minerva operation there. Investing huge amounts of numbers, buying feeder cattle here from Australia, the Angus feeders. I was there about 2 months ago. They've got plans to have the biggest Angus herd in the world of 800,000 head of Angus cattle, but their production has decreased dramatically. Yeah, if you look at Australia, and you know better than me, the figures in Australia, actually, in fact, every time I look at Australia, a new figure comes out, so I'm not quite sure. Maybe MLA will come out with another figure on Monday and tell us where they think the cattle herd will be. The phantom herd seems to have disappeared totally. Always people said the herd was one thing, but when the price went up, suddenly a load of cattle appeared. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. Maybe some of you think, yes, I've still got some phantom herds out there, I don't know. But Australia is going to be, and I think we heard some speakers this morning, the amount of meat Australia, the amount of cattle you're going to be able to export in the next 2 or 3 years is going to be significantly less than especially the last 2 or 3 years, which has been spectacular. And China, likewise, their focus has been elsewhere, but again, it's very stabilised. So really, on those graphs, on beef production, as I said, the headline figures tell you one story. This tells you a different story. It shows you the decrease in the herd. This is just an overview. I've already mentioned some of these figures. Herd rebuilding in the United States. United States becoming a net importer because of the reduction in their numbers. The NAFTA, 8% decline in the cattle herd in the last 10 years. There's been a strong cattle price in the last few years in the States. Australia, you've really liquidated your herd quite rapidly the last few years, and that graph's not up to date. I said let's get a more up to date one soon. I don't know what your herd will be in 2016. People talk 25, 26 million. If I then look at South America, I'm not just talking about, obviously not just talking about Brazil, and we'll just do the same exercise going through South America. In Brazil, we're seeing a 2.3% increase, and Steiner said, you saw his figure from Beef Central, we were right, he was talking about 2.6, 2.8% increase, over 6 million head increase, and that's on a cumulative basis, year on year, that's increasing. If you look at Uruguay, likewise, you're seeing a 2% increase in Uruguayan kill. Argentina, you've seen a smaller increase, but Argentina's really been affected by government who were not really friendly towards business, a populist government under Christine Kirchner, who's, I think, has lost the last election, and I think you'll see a big change in that country going forward. A wonderful country. I'm sure some of you have been there. Great cattle, great lands. Unfortunately, a potential has been wasted in the last few years. You can see that in the numbers down, but I would say that those numbers would be increasing going forward. If you look at Paraguay, and I suggest if you can spend the time, go to Paraguay to see the herd in what Paraguay's got to offer. Paraguay doesn't usually get into the news very often, but great cattle in Paraguay, great opportunities, getting more access to markets. It's a landlocked country, but not access to ports. Infrastructure is pretty tough, but great opportunities in that country. A lot of the farmers there are actually Brazilians. They bring a lot of the technology from Brazil into Paraguay. You're seeing the herd improvements, exactly what you're getting in Brazil. And Colombia, likewise. Colombia really has been a surprise for me, to be honest with you. We've opened one factory there. We'll look at others. Again, very, very good cattle. We've already started exporting. We did live cattle out of Colombia to Venezuela. Obviously very, very close on the border. We started doing some chilled beef out of there to the Middle East, to Russia. And dare I say it, that I think that the beef out of there is younger cattle, is good genetics, and they're doing very well. They're competing very well with Brazilian beef, and I dare say on chilled, actually doing better. Well, if you look at beef consumption worldwide, these are big graphs. And where the trend is, I haven't got a trend graph there, but we know the trend is really in China, in Asia. Russia has been very big on beef consumption. It's come back a bit now with the collapse of that economy, the ruble coming back and substitution with pork and chicken. USA roughly stable, EU stable, but really a lot of growth really in Asia, Southeast Asia. Beef exports, we've already touched on some of that. With those graphs, I think 2015-16 Australia was higher than that, but the real big players are Brazil, Australia, and India. India exporting more and more. The Indian beef being, as you know, mostly buffalo beef of a lower quality, doesn't really compete with where the markets where we're going, have markets for themselves. And you look at beef imports, and this shows even better the trend in Asia. Russia in this figure is quite high, but Russia's come back a bit now, as I mentioned before. But they're just macro figures, just to give you going forward. Here's a good graph just with a summary. If you look at South America, South America's production is nearly 15 million tons, and if you look at exports and imports, very little imported. And you look at that demand-supply, the demand-supply curve of each country very different, but really sort of backs up the graphs which I've just shown you on the previous slides. As regards Brazil's exports, there's been quite a favourable scenario being painted by myself, and we see that going forward. We see a global reduction in supply. You've seen that in some of the graphs which I put forward. Brazil is expanding, and I say Paraguay, Uruguay, Colombia is expanding. All those four countries are very well placed to get into other parts of the world to fill that supply gap. There's been a dollar appreciation, a reais depreciation just recently in Brazil. And third quarter 15, which finished just recently, the cattle price in US dollars went down 16% compared to the previous quarter. But conversely, the export beef price increased 8%, so there's quite a shift, a 24% change in margin of spread, and we see that continuing. One big trend which is happening, one big issue which is going forward, is the opening of the North American market to Brazilian beef. If you asked me about 4 months ago what I thought about that, and I would say, and I think some of our competitors, I think Wesley Batista said the same in a recent investor call, thought this would be delayed because the high stocks in the States, and I know the cold stores are full. I'll say a lot of the cold stores are full in the States because the amount of beef that Australia killed and shipped, and you hit quite a level, 400,000 tonnes, you've got slow boats going there, you've got product in store what will be going next quota, so it's really been one way to stuff a market up. You just shove so much meat in there, and everybody's going to suffer for probably the next 4 or 5 months. But the Americans are still very, that they go back one. We thought the strong lobby of the US, the Cattlemen's Association there, would be against the Brazilian beef being allowed in. But if I can tell you, this last week, last week, we had the USDA round looking at our factories, looking to approve them. And they're pushing quite hard. So we see one thing, people tell us one thing saying, oh, well, USA will not open, or they will, or they won't. At the same time, we've got the US authorities going around Brazil approving plants ready for opening. And I say we had 2 of our plants were visited last week and were approved. Sorry, approved in inverted commas. They're approved once the protocol is signed between the governments. But that will be very strong for Brazil. Brazil has a lot of lean cattle. Will fulfil the lean, which with the gap of the drop in the Australian kill, the Brazilians will fill. The other one is the Chinese market. There are 8 plants approved to China, and in fact, Katia Abril, who's Barnaby's sparring partner in Brazil, who's the Minister of Agriculture, she's a very aggressive lady, comes from the countryside up in the northern Tocantins, driving very hard for Brazil to have more market access. She was in China last week, and there's another 3 plants approved, so Brazil will have 11. And we've got one plant approved for China, and that plant is just doing everything to China possible. And we see that growing further and further. And it was when we got back into China, it was about 4 or 5 months ago, I said to some of our colleagues in some of the other markets, China will become our biggest market. And I'll show you some figures in a minute on that, which is actually coming true. So, in 2007, there was 11 exporters accounting for 70% of exports. There's been a concentration, as I said, 3 doing 80%. There's been increased diversification of Brazilian exports, the reopening of the markets into China mainland, and that's been a real big push. And late last night, and in fact 3:30 this morning, when I was suffering from jet lag, I turned on my computer and my business intelligence team has just sent me the latest forecast for November, and Brazil will export 105,000 tonnes, by their estimate, of boneless beef in November. Of that 105,000 tonnes, 40% will go to Asia, 20% will go to China, 18% will go to Hong Kong, Vietnam, and 2% with others, which is Singapore, Malaysia. Singapore and Malaysia are the only other 2 countries in Southeast Asia we've got approval for at the moment. That's quite a significant change. That's been a rapid change. That's 20,000 tonnes of beef per month has been exported from 8 plants. Only 8 plants. We're going to get another 3, and there'll be more plants approved. If you look at this graph here, I've got the change from 2007 to second quarter 2015. Last 12 months to 2015, second quarter. I think the big figures there, you see the CIS, Russia, it's just really economy-wise, come down from 29% of exports to 20%. Middle East and Africa, put them together because you've got Egypt, you've got Jordan, you've got Iran, you've got Iraq, you're all of them together, really roughly remained the same. EU's come down, America's has increased. That's mostly per product going to Venezuela and Chile, mostly to Venezuela. But the big one is Asia. 2007, only 6% of exports from Brazil, beef exports, went to Asia. The last 12 months, 23%. And if I say in November, it's 40. So huge move in the industry. And these are very significant changes, especially when we see what's going to happen with supply out of Australia. Here we've done, if you look at where, at the moment, Brazil has access only to 46% of the global beef demand, only 46%. That's before China. Now we've just got China back in. Last week, Saudi Arabia reapproved Brazil. So that'll be Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and one other one I can't remember. But in the Gulf there. So this is the work of our supportive Minister of Agriculture, Katia Abreu. This graph here shows that, or this table here shows that if Brazil get USA, our view, and it was confirmed by a respected figure in the industry here the other day to me, if USA is approved, Japan will likely follow. That will give us 72% of the global beef demand we'll have access to. If you push it one further, if we get into South Korea, Canada, Mexico, it's up to 84%. Based on the production figures I've shown you, the productivity gains, and based also on only 20% at this stage of the Brazilian meat production exported, there's huge potential for expansion of Brazilian beef. If I look at just on the USA market, if we get into the USA, we'll be under others, so we'll be limited to 60,000 tonnes. I don't think Australia will get anywhere near their quota number next year. I think that won't matter to the states for the first 4 or 5 months, but I think later on there could be possibility. Brazil coming with the 60,000 tonnes, there'll be more there for Brazil. If I then can I just talk a little bit about the live business, which Minerva undertake. Minerva started in the live business in 2003. I was with Minerva in that stage. We did our first shipment out of Pará. We shipped into Lebanon. We were the pioneer. We did the first shipment. It was quite, I'm sure when Australia did their first shipment, it was quite an adventure. It was for us as well. But we've learned from that. We've still got a long way to go. We're nowhere near the sophistication you've got here in Australia. And I say hats off to Australia for what you've done. It's something to aim for. It's something to go for, because you've really set the standard very high of animal welfare, your systems, your controls, your traceability. It's second to none. It's absolutely brilliant. This really shows, this map of South America shows the type of cattle we're exporting. In the northeast of Brazil, this is really from the state of Pará, from Belém and from Maranhão. Then the Nelore cattle, a very hardy breed. Some of you have been to Brazil will know what type of cattle, the type of cattle they are. Very, very hardy, long-legged, strong, very, very strong cattle. Our mortality rates on board are very, very low indeed. We put 5,000 cattle on a ship. We get less than 5 deads, less than 5. We want 0, but I mean it's very good going. We're seeing that these Girolandia is a mix between Holstein and really and they're law, very hardy. They're not a very careful what I say. There's no producers of Girolandia cattle here. They're not the best cattle in the world, but they serve a purpose. The dairy cattle. The cattle we get out of Uruguay, we ship out Herefords. We do some Angus. We've done some business out of Chile. This is going to China. There's Holsteins and Jerseys, and then from the Brahmans out of Colombia that may go to Venezuela. This is Minerva's performance in Brazil. We've averaged between 35% of the live shipments out of Brazil. The shipments have averaged. The floating average there is probably about 600,000 head have been shipped out live from Brazil, and I say we've had 36, 37, about 200,000 head. This year, up until September, there was only 185,000 live cattle shipped out of Brazil. Most of that's because of the issues in Venezuela. The credit in Venezuela has been rather difficult with the economy. We maintain our sales to Venezuela with our relationships within Venezuela, and I'm quite surprised with our share, but we're up to 68%, which is about, my cribbing here is about 125,000 head we've shipped out so far this year. And we would estimate that we would do, Minerva would probably be around that 200,000. But there's big opportunities to do more. We've got a small live team. The majority, I say, most of those cattle come out of Pará, and the majority go to Venezuela. If you look at where we ship, there's our share in Venezuela, 75%, which is very unusual to have it that high. But Lebanon, Jordania, so that's a Portuguese, English, but Jordan and Iraq. So that's where we're sending our cattle. If you look then at the weights of cattle, we're shipping slaughter weight cattle, just over 500 kilos. Excuse me. Those big drops in May 2014 and March have been we've shipped some feeder cattle. It's not been our focus, but we're always looking for opportunities throughout the rest of the world of where we can ship our cattle. If you look at we were the pioneers in 2003. There's been more regulations coming to the industry. In 2009, there's a consolidation. We don't have all the controls that you have here in Australia. It's something to aim for. I think, I said, repeating myself, but I think what you've done is absolutely brilliant. Cattle are purchased on a live weight basis. And then we pay the price we pay is exactly the same price we pay to our meatworks based on a carcass weight, and we use those percentages for a yield. Shipment times, Venezuela 5 to 6 days, sometimes shorter. The sailing time is 3 to 4 days, but there's always a bit of congestion getting into the port in Caracas and other places. And the Middle East is roughly 20 days. I said live cattle hasn't been. We're probably there's 2 meat companies, processing companies doing live cattle in Brazil. Ourselves and Mafripar. JBS don't do live cattle. Marfrig don't do live cattle. And it's not usual for a processor to do live cattle. But we see it as a fundamental for the business. There's parts of Brazil where it suits, like the northern part of Australia, it suits live cattle to do it, and we're fully supportive of the live cattle business, and we play a very important part in it. The future, based on all those figures I put together, what I try to do with a SWOT analysis, and there'll be hopefully some time for questions after this, but I didn't want to bore you with thousands of slides and say we think this trend will go this way, that will go this, and I thought we'd just do a basic SWOT analysis, strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats of your industry as we see it, and in South America. It's not exclusive. I'm sure there'll be some comments on some of the points out there. Also, I've done it on the Brazilian industry. I'm going to show you in a minute. I'm not scared to show you, but I just want to put that on the table so you have a look at it. So here we go. I've already mentioned, I think, the strengths here in Australia. You've got strong genetics. You've got disease-free. It's fantastic. And you're very protective of that, and it's brilliant. Your location in Southeast Asia, meeting the Southeast Asian countries, especially on the live business, is a very strong strength into Indonesia, Vietnam, and other parts. Your infrastructure, as Barnaby mentioned, the support you're getting from government for increasing in infrastructure, in roads and rail, not so much rail, sorry, but rail maybe in Queensland, but in ports, I think is great. I think you've got a great structure. Obviously, you say, look, we need better, we need this, but you come from a very, very strong base. I remember when I was here with JBS and when I was here in 1984 previously. I think the industry controls and the procedures and the bodies you've got that monitor production, your OzMeat, MLA, all the other RMAC, all the other ALEC or Alpha, all the associations get a lot of knocking. They got a lot of knocking when I was here, and everybody was saying, I got too many controls, or too many bodies, too many quangos, whatever. But you've got something the rest of the world wish they had. You've got something fantastic. When I speak, I tell the Brazilian guys what the controls, what your carcass specification is standardized, your OzMeat language is standardized. It's absolutely brilliant. You don't knock it. When I was here, people would knock it. I said, you're mad. You're mad to knock it. It's fantastic. The rest of the world want what you've got. I know a lot of you say, oh, I've got all the extra costs, but what have you got in your hands? It's everybody can look up to. I mean, it really is second to none. I think the business relationship and ethics in Australia, yes, you've had some ups and downs with Indonesia, but are strong. And that does well for the industry. So those are really strong. And I could put more down, but those are the basic ones that we see from afar from Australia. A real country who's got strong controls, strong genetics, disease-free, has a great infrastructure, and a reducing herd, unfortunately. But opportunities, increased demand. I've already said that throughout. You've got increased number of FTAs. You've got FTAs coming out your ears. Every week I see you've got another FTA, which is great. I hope they can fulfil them all. I wish Brazil bloody had it, I tell you. I mean, just unbelievable. But no, you've done, market access, you've got access to every market in the world. I don't know a market you haven't got access to. So what a wonderful opportunity there. I put foreign investment in the supply chain, but I wrote that before this, the FIRB knocked back Kidman. I've got no idea why they did. I think, I came from the Vesti group. The Vestis were a huge foreign investor here. JBS is a huge foreign investor here and put a lot of money into the economy, a lot of capital expenditure. I know when Don came to see us, we just built a tannery in Dinmore. We were investing money all the time, creating jobs. You want that money. You want those sort of people to be in your industry, to really push. I don't know why this xenophobia with you don't want foreign investment. I don't understand that. People are bringing value and creating jobs, bringing ideas, which is, I believe it's an opportunity. The weaknesses I see, I think you've got weakening supply, and I think I've said enough of that. And I think that is a big weakness for you at the moment. I know the industry's done well recently, but there's always been a huge rural debt. If I look at the Brazilian farmers, they're very heavily capitalised, don't have the debt that a lot of the industry here burden themselves with, and that's hindered some investments. Threats, as I see for the industry here, continued drought. I mean, the herd liquidation has been unbelievable here. I think one thing I always used to go on when I was here with JBS was the increased cost of doing business here. I won't go through it now, but I can go through cost comparisons, and I did them when I was here, and I obviously being in Brazil now, I can see the cost of production in Brazil and South America compared to here, and it's got wider. It's got wider. I always put down here, business environment is not friendly, and that really is for the live business. I've seen the progress you've made in the industry is been great, but I know when I was here before, and when I left in 2012, in 2011, when the boats were stopped, there really was a lot of knockers about our industry, not just the live business, but the whole industry, and it didn't. That doesn't help the business. That does not help your business at all to go forward. You have that negativity, and whether it be animal welfare activists who just don't want the industry to continue at all, no matter what you do. They've got no complaints today. I can't see any complaint at all. Yeah? But that doesn't help your business. It does not help. And then I'll go to Brazil. What do I see the strengths in Brazil? Plentiful supply. You've already seen the figures. I've given the figures to you of increased productivity, increased numbers. Price competitiveness. Brazil is very competitive. Has a lower cost of production, I've already mentioned. We've got a very proactive industry. We've got a government who is really, I see Barnaby's pushing hard now, but we see with Katia Abril really pushing our industry, really supportive of our industry to expand and giving all the benefits possible for us to do that. So we've got proactive, supportive government helping us. We've got a highly capitalised farm sector. We don't have the debt levels, do not have the debt levels here. Brazil has become a relevant grain producer, and you've seen that with the increase in the feedlots and the semi-feedlot in the business. And that's all the different production systems. So those are the strengths. Opportunities, increased demand, we've already talked about, improved efficiency and productivity, I've already mentioned. Competitor weakness in supply. And I see that from, you've already seen the graphs there. Strength, opportunities, improved genetics, improved pasture, improved market access. I've already mentioned that. Increased quality of cattle. We're moving forward into niche. If you look at Uruguay, Uruguay is one of the biggest, not just Brazil, but moving from Brazil, but Uruguay is one of the biggest suppliers of organic beef to the United States. Came from nowhere to be in that position. You'll have the same in Brazil. Brazil will go down that side as well. Opportunity, only 20%. Only 20% is export, and we see that there's been weakness, limited market access. The infrastructure is poor at the ports, completely opposite from Brazil, from Australia, sorry. It's improving, but it's got a long way to go. Threats, weakness in the local economy, but that will probably mean more exports. Brazil is into a recession. There's political instability. It's unfortunate. There's talk of impeachment of the government, whatever. We've had a scandal of Petrobras in Brazil, which hasn't done the country any favours at all. Is that affecting our industry? No. No, we're getting on with business. We're getting on with business. But just on the general, it makes our dollar, our reais, or I put it a dollar, very volatile. And it makes, I think when you work in an environment where a currency is appreciating or depreciating, you can manage quite well. You can take positions and hedge. When the country's got so much volatility, it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult. So, my summary. And I haven't put down many points, but I thought just a few pertinent ones. Brazil will gain access to more markets, that's for sure. We've already seen that now. Brazilian industry will continue to grow. You've already seen on the cattle herd, productivity. I think Australia's ability to supply in the market will continue to weaken due to the large decrease in the Australian herd side. My final point, Brazil is there and is eager to fill this gap, and will fill the gap in many areas. There'll be some markets where Brazil won't compete, but in a great many markets throughout the world, Brazil is moving forward, and you've already seen that in those figures I already talked about in the exports into Asia. My last slide, thank you.
Thanks, Iain. A fantastic summary of the global industry with your perspective. Is just invaluable to this industry to get a feel for what's happening around the rest of the world. Look, I'd invite questions, and if you could keep them short and sharp would be great. My God, you stunned me. Got a question down in the front here. I just can't see everybody. Yep. Yeah, just hang on, we've got a mic coming, yeah.
My name's Andrew from a company called Charter Air. Just wondering how the Brazilians handle the greenies and the people who are against the industry, or don't you have that certain problem down there?
There is a small body who are against, in every country, who are against the industry. But I would like to say in Brazil, the voice is very low. And the attitude is, in Brazil, they want to make it work. They've got to make it work. We know we've got a lot to do. We know that, and the industry know that. And if you're moving along the line, to do things better. You know, that is pointing out the good signals. We don't have the negativity at this stage, and hopefully we don't. We don't have the negativity. We have a much more supportive population and industry and government for our business. So.
Hi, Ian. James Nason from Beef Central. Thanks very much for a really informative talk. I just wanted to ask you about how you see South American cattle and access into Southeast Asian markets for live export, Indonesia and probably Vietnam as well. Can you see Brazil getting access to Indonesia? And if so, do you think you can compete with Australian cattle on price in that market? And also, do you see other South American countries getting into the Southeast Asian live export market as well?
I think let's start with the last part of the question first. Other countries in South America into Southeast Asia, not really, not so much, because just with the cattle population, what alternatives they got. I said there's been some dairy cattle out from Chile and also from Uruguay to China, but that's for a specific market. Brazil coming into Indonesia and Vietnam. People have asked me that question, and they say, isn't it too far to come? But it's not too far to come. I think the industry has been really based on slaughter weight cattle. So I would say what you'll see first is into the market of Vietnam. And I know with the panel up here we're talking about, and I saw the comments about the country maturing and bringing in feeder cattle to put on feedlots in Vietnam. I don't know Vietnam, so I can't give an informed opinion on that. I'll leave it to they've got a better idea than me. But the industry wants beef. I think Brazil will be in a position, when it gets all the protocols, will be in a position to supply that market with slaughter-ready cattle. As regards Indonesia, it's a market where we always hear there's an opportunity for Brazil to get into. There's no protocol. And is there a chance in the future? Yes, there is. Would it be, and again, I'm not an expert on Indonesia, so, and I think the young lady from Indonesia was talking about how what Indonesia do well is feeding cattle on the byproducts of industry there. So, and that market has really been what the government want, feeder cattle for the industry, the feedlot industry, what have you. Whether that will be an industry, it hasn't been a market that Brazil has been into, but it's a market if there's a demand, we would always entertain the idea, yeah. But there's hurdles to get over. Yeah.
You got another? Yep.
Hi Ian, Kim Hayward from WA Farmers Federation. Thank you very much for your talk. It was an excellent presentation. I'm interested to hear what animal health or disease threats you think are around the corner for both the live and the meat trade.
Okay. Sorry, so your question was about animal
health or animal disease. What are the key diseases you think we'll need to be looking at in the future?
Okay.
Around foot and mouth. And
you're talking about foot and mouth. Yeah, I mean, Brazil is free from foot and mouth with vaccination. There's a vaccination program throughout Brazil. So all cattle are vaccinated. There's a vaccination program, so they will be free from that. Animal health has improved quite remarkably. And will continue to improve. As I say, the industry is very heavily capitalised. So the farmers want herd improvements. They're looking for herd improvements, and they're getting the returns. Any disease which we're not anywhere near the status that Australia is in. But I would say we would move fairly quickly along that path to become of the same status.
How are we going? I've got another one just down the back there. Yep. There's a mic coming behind you there.
Thank you. My name is George Asaf from Al-Khalaf Group. Thank you for your presentation. Do you think the increased animal welfare in Australia is creating more market opportunity for Brazil around the world? We hear when we travel in the Middle East and Asia that when they see Australia becoming very tough on animal welfare, they say, oh, well, let's go to Brazil. Can you give us your honest opinion on this? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've heard those comments. I'll take what you said. I don't know if your customers say that. I don't know. Brazil would like to move, and there is a move to improve animal welfare, the welfare of the cattle that we export. Yeah? There is room for improvement. There's always room for improvement to that. I haven't heard any customers saying, oh, I'm not going to buy from Australia because you've got stronger animal welfare controls than Brazil. I haven't heard that. Maybe people would think that, but I don't think, I mean, on a practical basis, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Jeff Maynard.
Thanks very much, Ian. Enjoyed your presentation immensely.
How you going?
Just a couple of points with your SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
Obviously, Australia product has meet standards Australia, so we could expect that we'd have a better quality of product going out internationally than Brazil. Do you see that as a significant factor? And just the second point of the question, you've already mentioned how the cattle herds in Brazil have moved to the northeast as agricultural soybeans or sugarcane becomes more profitable. Do you see that trend, and will that put a bit of squeeze on supply sometime or other?
As regards MSA, again, this is something I think I was blown away with when I was here in Australia. What a fantastic science that you developed. You're world leaders, and you've got a competitive advantage with that. Other countries haven't got the MSA. It's a great system, really good system, tried and proved. There's no doubt that the Australian, if you look at on a profile where Australian beef is sold, the quality of your meat is much higher. From South America, you would have competition from Argentina and Uruguay because they're catching up. They haven't got MSA, but they're catching up. On commodity items like trimmings, Rob 4s or forequarter, that's where you'll struggle, and you've got to sell that meat. You've got to sell that meat. You can't just sell high quality beef. You've got the rest of the animal to sell. Will Brazil compete against on your high quality? It will go after some of the niches, but the volume out of Brazil is going to be on the commodity side. So there is some niche that would go. The cattle population in Brazil has gone to northwest, not northeast, kind of northwest. What's happening is to counteract that. Not so counteract, but the increased profitability per hectare if you go to soybeans, that mixed farming, which I mentioned to you, if they're doing cropping and pasture and forestry, that seems to be a big trend in Brazil. There seems to be a much bigger return from that. You know, 3 million hectares from virtually nothing. It's huge change, and I think I think that pressure, and there are some lands which will not take soya. Yeah? Which will always be for cattle. But that mixed farming, I think in Brazil you'll see a lot more of that, a lot more.
How are we going? I'll handle one or two quick questions further, if I've got them. Yes, got one in the front here. Just wait for a mic. Sorry. Just coming behind you there now.
My name is Michael from Cargo Center. Yeah, I just want to ask you for the Chinese market. You know, Australia is the biggest. China takes imports from Australia as the biggest import from the rest of the world. Almost 50% of the Chinese imports beef coming from Australia. Given the trend in the next few years, Australia's supply will be decreasing. Who do you think will take this advantage of the situation? Brazil will be the one. Be the biggest importer for China?
Yes. No, I think the figures I got overnight, which I was shocked with, because 20,000 tons were shipped in November, and that's virtually nothing into China. So I think if you looked at some statistics today, I think you would find Australia is no longer the largest, even today. I think it will decrease. Australia will find a place in, as Jeff was saying, into high quality, some of the high quality cuts, into the state cuts into China. I think that will be a fight between Uruguay and Australia. But in commercial, if you're looking into manufacturing grade beef, going into processing, going into food service, I think you will find that Brazil will take more and more of that share.
Iain, I'm sorry to have to cut it short. We're starting to run a little over time, but you're here for the next...
Today, I leave on, I think it's 12:30 in the morning on Friday morning.
Okay. So you're around anyhow, at least for the next little while, and tonight. That'll be great, because I think you better sort of adopt the tripod position with a beer in your hand against the bar. You're going to have a lot of questions, I'm sure. So it'll be great for people to catch up with you during the evening. So thanks, Iain. Would you thank Iain very much for a wonderful presentation?